Alrighty, we are here today to remove this 5-unit bridge, which consists of 3 splinted abutments, canine, first bicuspid, and second bicuspid, and 2 cantilevered pontics. As you can see, we have already done vertical slices in all 3 so that we could then remove it. And if you want to see how to do this, I refer you to the videotape on how to remove existing crown and bridge work. Well, this has been done. Open just a little bit, and it comes right off. Now, the thing that you will immediately note is that there is still sound tooth structure on the first bicuspid, but absolutely nothing left on the first bicuspid, or the canine or the second bicuspid. And if we look inside the bridge, we can see what used to be tooth structure. Here's an amalgam core that had been used as the substructure for the terminal abutment, and here's remaining tooth structure which has succumbed to recurrent decay. Looking at these radiographs, which we will show you in detail, we can see, of course, that there is recurrent decay around the margins of the canine and the second bicuspid. Well then, the question then comes about as to whether or not either of those 2 teeth can be saved, and if so, do they need endodontic therapy or do they need crown lengthening? So we'll start then with the second bicuspid, which has an extremely short root. If I take the perio probe and go subgingivally, I cannot find solid tooth structure probing all the way down to 5, 6, almost 7 millimeters from the interdental papilla's crest. I'm going all the way down to the epithelial attachment before I find any sound tooth. That's on the mesial. On the distal, there's a little sound tooth structure about 2 millimeters below this level of gingiva. On the lingual. On the distal, it's also about almost 3 millimeters, and facially, there's tooth structure, but it's very soft, going down to about 3 millimeters as well. So then I go back to the radiographs, and I hold the perio probe against the tooth and realize that the amount of sound tooth structure and its location relative to the bone, it is clearly down to the level of the epithelial attachment. And in order for us then to expose enough root, we would have to take away 2 to 3 millimeters of bone, and we only have 7 millimeters of root structure in the bone. Clearly, this would violate any closeness to Auntie's law. We don't have enough bone left to be able to support that, so that particular tooth needs to be extracted. Crown lengthening would not help in one bit. Now, let's come to the first bicuspid. Whoops, I meant canine. Here we have much more solid tooth, much closer to the gingival margin. I can't say for sure where that will wind up after the decay that's on that surface is excavated. But looking at this radiograph, I can see that we have a much longer root in the bone, and I can see that the decay does not extend as far subgingivally. So what we now must do is take a slow-speed round burr and excavate the caries. We'll then take the perio probe relative to the position of the solid tooth and make that determination at that time as to whether or not we need crown lengthening. If we need crown lengthening, it can be done successfully on this tooth because it has a long root, and even after bone is lowered, we'll still have enough for it to provide stability as part of a new prosthesis. Now, what will the final treatment plan be? Well, assuming that we can save this tooth and this tooth, we can crown both of those and then proceed with a removable partial denture in the posterior section, or we can proceed with implant placement in the back right. The other interesting feature of note on this radiograph is the widened PDL on the first bicuspid. And, of course, the reason for that is it's the only abutment for what was a 5-unit bridge. So it's no wonder that it is a little bit mobile. All right, I shall now try to see if we can demonstrate the mobility clinically. Open, please. Perhaps you can see the facial occlusal angle wiggling back and forth with about, 3/4 to 1 millimeter of sway. That's the degree of mobility that the tooth currently has, which we know will tighten up as soon as it's a single provisional. All right then, a question that's often asked of me is whether or not a tooth needs crown lengthening. And my answer is, may I see the tooth with all the caries gone so that I can determine where the level of the caries is relative to the epithelial attachment and the osseous crest. In other words, if you'd like me to tell you what is in the box, you must allow me to open the box. So, if you recall, we were suspicious that this tooth may need crown lengthening, but it was impossible to determine until the caries was removed with this slow-speed round burr. And this was worked here and peripherally right out to the edge of the sound tooth structure, slightly under this inflamed gingiva, brought to the facial, brought back to the distal. Then, taking the perio probe, I can find out where the sound tooth structure is relative to the epithelial attachment. And I come down, and the attachment is either right at the edge of the sound tooth structure or no more than 1/4 to 1/2 millimeter below it. That is insufficient tooth structure coronal to the epithelial attachment for us to use as the marginal seal of a crown to create the appropriate ferrule effect, recalling that a post and core, the core must end providing us with a millimeter of sound tooth structure for the marginal seal of the crown that goes over it. We do not have that in this case. Therefore, this tooth will need to have intentional endodontics and a post and core and crown lengthening, at which point in time the tissue will be flapped from the facial and the lingual. 2.5 millimeters approximately of bone will be removed, and it will be contoured inappropriately with the surfaces of the mesial surface, of the first bicuspid and the distal of the lateral. And this will then allow the connective and epithelial attachments to firm up coronal to the bone crest and still give us 1 to 1.5 millimeters of tooth for the margin of the crown. So we now know where we're going here. This is fine. This needs endodontics and crown lengthening, and this will be extracted. Thank you very much. Okay, once again we're here to determine whether or not teeth need crown lengthening. As we take a look at the radiographs, we can see that tooth number 30 has already had root canal therapy, and tooth number 31 has a reasonably large temporary restoration. But this does not give us a clear indication as to what the level of sound tooth is in relationship to the epithelial attachment or indeed the osseous crest. So what we need to do is take a look intraorally. And when we do so, we can see that there are temporary restorations, ZOE, in tooth number 30 and in tooth number 31. And these temporaries prevent me from being able to determine the extent of the caries and where the sound tooth structure is relative to the soft tissue structures. So what needs to be done is the removal of the temporary restoration so that we can actually do that determination. So, Jordan, if you would be so kind as to remove the temporaries, and then we'll take another look and do the analysis. Okay. Alrighty then, here we are with the temporary restorations removed. Endodontics has been started on this tooth. Endodontics has been completed on this one. But the critical areas are the points where recurrent caries was removed along the distal lingual corner of number 30, along the distal border. And when I take the perio probe and go out to the extreme edge of the sound tooth structure, and this is sound, all the caries has been removed, there's absolutely no break between the end of the sound tooth structure and the epithelial attachment. They're one and the same. I go right here and I am at the attachment, at the attachment, at the attachment. I need at least 1 millimeter of solid tooth, as if I were probing subgingivally, as you would see here on the mesiolingual corner, of subgingival tooth structure in order to be able to place a crown without crown lengthening. So this tooth needs crown lengthening. And then we come to the mesial of number 31, and I come forward, and once again, the level of sound tooth is absolutely contiguous with the epithelial attachment, so it too needs crown lengthening. The advantage for a patient, of course, is that they will be done simultaneously, and the area that needs to be lengthened is right in here between two adjacent sections of teeth. So, at this point then, we can say with certainty that crown lengthening was necessary. Please, whenever there's any doubt and there's a provisional restoration in place, we must remove the provisional to determine, one, that all it carries has been removed, and two, where is that level of sound tooth structure relative to the epithelial attachment. There we are. Here we have another situation where we're going to determine whether or not a tooth needs crown lengthening. If we take a look at tooth number 10, we can see that the original crown is missing. But here, right at the gum line, we have solid tooth structure all the way around. And when I probe, I'm going down 2.5 to 3 millimeters of solid tooth structure. This tooth does not need crown lengthening because we have ample structure upon which to place the margins of the new crown, following the placement of a postum core.